WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We Should Know is on the air every Tuesday. Always a pleasure to have a different show with a little different direction. Today, I'm very excited to have with us an old friend that's been here before, Robert Honeycutt. Robert, thank you for being with us. Also, I want to introduce a new friend, Eddie Ray. Eddie Ray from North Carolina. I want to just give a quick intro to you because I know everybody probably knows Robert Honeycutt from being local, but they may not know that much about you. Eddie Ray, you've got 60 plus years in the music business, including record distribution, promotion, sales. You've done literally everything involved music all over the world. And if you have worked for top executive positions, you've been in top executive positions in Hollywood, California, Memphis, Tennessee. You've even worked for the federal government for President Ronald Reagan.
That's right.
And the interesting thing, from Capitol Records to television productions with Imperial Records, to Central Record sales companies, all of these companies, you started out by leaving a little place in North Carolina called Franklin.
That's right.
At a very young age. And Robert, I'm going to start with him, and I'm going to let you help me with this. But we talked about, prior to this show, some of the folks that run the equipment here and the directors and other people that tell me what to do, we talked about how important it is for a person to be able to look beyond their colloquial area. Yes. At age 18 or 19, young guy, the first question I'm going to ask you is, what drove you to Milwaukee, Wisconsin?
It's very strange, but it's going to take a few minutes to tell you how on my way to Milwaukee. First, I left Franklin, North Carolina at 16 years of age. And I went to a senior year in high school in Laurinburg. There was a boarding high school called Laurinburg Institute. So I went there, and after I graduated from Laurinburg, during the last senior year there, I was 17. I took a specialized training program in the U.S. Army, and I passed the test. And at the age of 18, after I'd graduated, they sent me to Howard University in Washington, D.C., where I spent 6 months prior to becoming 18 in Army Specialized Training Program, Reserve Program, Army Specialized Training. And then I came to Fort Bragg to be inducted because I was originally from North Carolina. But I had a choice to go back to Advanced Army Specialized Training Program, or OCS. I chose OCS, which was a 90-day to become a second lieutenant. There they discovered cataract, the growth of cataract on both of my eyes at that early age, which was almost impossible. No one knew why.
That was an anomaly
at that age, and so I was unable to continue my military career. I went to Hartford, Connecticut, back working at a ball bearing factory, decided I was going to go on to college, but just before I did, I saw a sign that says, beer that made Milwaukee famous. And would you believe this? It doesn't prove that I was very mature, very intelligent, but I found myself, instead of going to college, on the way to Milwaukee.
Because of that sign?
Because of that sign. What a stupid, when I think back on it. But that's the reason I went to Milwaukee, and they sent me to, went to the employment agency. They sent me to one of those foundries where they're making war equipment. I walked in there, these guys, 6'6", Hughes guys. They said, get in here. I'm 5'5", less than 5'5", and weighing about 120 pounds. They said, get out of here. You can't do this kind of work. And they went back and they sent me to a distributing company called Decca Record Distributing Company. And that's how I started as a stock boy there at the age of 18.
Robert Honeycutt, at that time and even now, folks our age and older, when he said Decca Records, we remember that name, don't we?
Sure do.
Yeah.
Because some of the big names
artists were Decca.
That was Decca. So I want to just kind of mention, so folks will kind of get an idea of where we're headed here, is that you have worked closely with people like Fats Domino, Ricky Nelson, Slim Whitman, the Osmonds, and the name goes on. Smiley Lewis, Sandy Nelson, Johnny Rivers,
Pink Floyd.
I mean, it's tremendous. Robert Honeycutt, you have, and I want to kind of tie this discussion together. Robert Honeycutt's experience here in Eastern North Carolina was during that period of time in the 50s and 60s, particularly the 60s, as it relates to the genres of music come together when African American artists not only started being recognized, but in the rural South became part of what folks were going to hear. Notice I didn't say wanted to, they were going to hear it one way or the other. And he had a little dance club. When I say little, I'm not putting it down, but compared to where this guy's been, a small dance club in Eastern North Carolina, and folks would leave the tobacco patches to go there.
To it.
So my question then, for both of you, is how did this happen that you from Franklin decided you would go to Milwaukee, and we'll get into that part where you left Milwaukee because it was a little bit cold there for you, and ended up in California. Your destiny was interesting, and you made a reference to that in your book, especially in your opening prologue about when you were being inducted into the Hall of Fame here in North Carolina, that it was kind of odd. You were standing there and you had made almost a full circle around the world.
And back.
And there you were in front of 150, 200 people in an opulent room, Italian marble, everybody dressed to the nines, and here you are, and they're recognizing you from Franklin County. What does that say to everybody else? Either one of you.
Well, it just shows you what a man can do if he's in his head. Eddie, I met Eddie in 2011. And I tell everybody I'm Eddie's youngest brother.
From another mother.
Another mother.
Brother from another mother.
But anyway, it just shows you what a man can do.
When we look at the music industry now, gentlemen, and I'll ask you both of this question because you came from one sense of an era of music. Music's always been, and I think will always be, part of the human race.
I definitely believe that.
So what has changed that you have noticed the most, and what should we expect? Because when you look back at the days of Sammy Davis Jr. and you look back at the days of some of these folks that we have referenced at this point in time, we see different kinds of things happening. Let's talk about what's similar now as compared to back then.
Well, it's a totally different scene today. As you know, you went to Williams Lake. Of course, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, you had jazz. Louis Armstrong, some of these guys, Cab Calloway, Dizzy Gillespie. Dizzy went to Laurinburg Institute. You know that? And of course, it evolved into rhythm and blues, and it all came from cotton fields in Mississippi and Alabama and North Carolina and Durham. And it just evolved into what we, back in those days, called rhythm and blues. Soul music, which today they call soul music, rhythm and blues. It's not what we grew up on. And of course, the 50s and 60s is probably the best music was ever recorded, including some of the country music. But today, everything is totally different.
Eddie, to that question.
I think also I agree with what Robert's saying, but one of the things I think that creates the change in music is the manner in which music is distributed. For instance, when I'm telling you, when he talked about blues in Mississippi, whether it comes from Mississippi Delta or Piedmont blues, it was limited to a small area. But as promotion men came on the scene, like me, that's what I was, that was able to get that music into mainstream radio of that day, which was very difficult to do. To get radio stations in Charlotte, in New York, in California, to bring that music out of the Mississippi Delta, out of the Piedmont Mountains, the blues, into the mainstream where more people could hear it. For a lot of people, that was the creation of a new genre of music. But it had been there for a long, long time. But it was able to bring it out. Today, you see, when I was in promotion, I would say, this is a record that I can start in Charlotte, North Carolina, or this is a record I could start in Seattle, Washington, the way manufacturers sell soap or any other kind of product. But today, you can say this, you start the world simultaneously. And so that means the type of music that you bring in brings elements from Asia, elements from Mexico, elements from America, and from different, which changes the structure of the A&R, the creative end of the music. So if I were back into producing music today, I would be making music that would sell worldwide.
We're going to pick up on that thought when we come back. We're going to take our first break, and we'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us today. We're talking with two music men. One of them has a huge history right here in the United States, from North Carolina. Call a friend. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
You're out for an evening on the town. Finally a chance to relax and forget that you left your front door completely unlocked. Fortunately, you just installed a security system from Star Communications. With just your cell phone, you can check on your house, lock it down, light it up, and get back to relaxing.
You forgot to put Buster in his crate.
Unfortunately, we can't help with that. Security and automation from Star Communications. Call today to find out more.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We've got two giant folks with us today in the music industry. One, Eddie Ray. Eddie Ray's from North Carolina. Franklin, grew up in Franklin. And also Robert Honeycutt. A lot of folks know Robert Honeycutt. He's been around for some time right from this area. And Williams Lake folks remember Robert Honeycutt. Name is known in the area. Eddie, you are somewhat of an icon, and a lot of folks may not know this, but your travels at an early age took you to Milwaukee, that took you from there to California. You've ended up in top executive positions with Capitol Records, numerous other record companies, to include record companies in Memphis, Tennessee. You've talked with and connected with people like Pink Floyd, Al Green, the names, just the Osmonds, the names continue to go on, and I'm talking started as a stock clerk, actually shipping records, those plastic things that people don't see anymore, shipping those out by the hundreds. And as I looked at your book, and we were talking off air a bit, the music industry has changed so dramatically and dynamically. Both of you guys are involved with Music Hall of Fame here in North Carolina. You're an inductee in October '09. What are we missing now that you feel that was going on during your day? Is there a piece of that granite rock of what music means to the soul that we're missing now that could be added back? Is there something we're missing? Because I see, as we talked about off air, a lot of the visuality part. Does that take away from the music or add to the music?
First, I don't want to sound like an old guy who's too old for the new modern music industry. but I think there's a lot of good things happening in the music, in the way music is produced and sold, and distributed across the world. There's a potential for selling much, much more music than there was during the time I was most active in the industry. Some of the things bothers me, honestly, but maybe it's because I'm too tied to my past in that area, even though I like to think of myself as being a visionary. And I do like a lot of the advances that's been made in the industry. But one of the things is, I don't know how you feel about this, Robert, but first I think some things were lost in the production of music. I don't mean that we should go back to the one microphone where everyone was in the room together, including and feeding off of each other, but there was something to that was great, that each artist, the background singers, the musicians, the producers, the engineers, they all had add to it.
Is it the authenticity?
Where today, a kid can be in his bedroom by himself. The piano player can be in Mexico City. The drummer can be in Canada. And sometimes I have a feeling you're losing something there, you know? But that's what's, you know, this is the way the industry and the way the world is moving. The other thing is, we had a brief conversation before the show, is the way music is presented. It's presented, the now generation has grown up buying music from videos. It's a visual thing rather than audio thing. And sometimes in the presentation, the way it's presented on TV and other ways of presenting music, sometimes instead of listening to the song, the story, you got 50 dancing ladies there instead, that covers up so no one really hears the lyrics, the story of the music.
I think as I hear Robert Eddie's commentary on that, I'm envisioning like Beyonce's concerts, those kinds of things where millions of people just pack in to see that, and you ask them, you know, and they'll say, we're going to see a show. The part of that, do you sense that to be true, Robert, from your perspective?
Music, regardless of what kind of music it is, country, rock, rap, everything now is built around that video.
Yes.
If you don't have, if they think they got a hit record, there will be a video. And like Eddie said, a lot of it, the visual part of it, is not what you hear.
The experience of that, though, historically, when you were at Williams Lake and were running Williams Lake, was based on a lot of the people that you were involved with as an executive. Robert was connecting with as some of them were emerging artists at Williams Lake.
That's true.
Speak to some of those people that you had at Williams Lake that ultimately you might have touched from California somewhere.
In fact, we looked to guys like him to supply us with the talent.
They were kind of the feeding entity.
Of course, yeah.
There was people like Jackie Wilson, Martha Reeves, and the Vandellas, of course, they were Motown.
They were already made. Yeah.
But back in those days, you had to feel the music. Most people liked to dance back in those days. There was something about the music, you just had to feel it.
Yeah, Eddie, you mentioned in your book that you didn't play music.
That's right.
You had no vocal interest or ability with music.
Right.
And you talked about it in the sense that it was just interesting that you didn't have a background, but yet you mentioned you had two things. Mm-hmm. You remember that? Tell us what those two things were that.
I said, if I have any talent, and the talent I'm thankful for is that first is that I have the ability to recognize talent in other people at an early stage, sometimes even before they do. And I think that was God's gift to me. The other thing is I had the ability to put things around them to make it happen, the right arranger, the right song, and even knowing how important the promotion was. Sales and promotion, that's part of it, part of the whole thing. And I think if I can point to my secret in the success I may have had in the industry, it's because of that.
There was an article some time ago in Rolling Stones magazine, and there was some commentary regards to Elvis Presley.
Right.
As to whether, and I'm going to let you follow up on this, but it basically spoke to Elvis as being, quote, and you hear this all the time, Robert Honeycutt, Elvis is the king of rock and roll.
Right.
If he's the king, then maybe my question should be, who built the castle?
Let me tell you what I feel about Elvis. I've been asked this question many times. Elvis, and I'm very familiar with his work, and I'm very familiar with what was happening with other artists, especially black artists that Elvis really liked and spent a lot of time with.
He grew up in that culture.
And absolutely, that was his life. Plus some of the greatest songwriters that wrote songs were written by black artists, by black songwriters, and he would copy a lot of black artists the same way a lot of other white artists did. But in my opinion, Elvis had that fantastic ability that he would take a song, something done by, it was called copying, but he was one of the few guys that I ever felt did it better than the original one. And for instance, a lot of people did some of Fats Domino's things, like Pat Boone, where Fats would say, "Ain't That a Shame?" where we sold about 6 or 7 million records on. It's a huge record. Elvis covered it, did well on it. Fats was very happy he did it. But he wanted to call it "Isn't That a Shame?" I'm just saying that to show what it does, what it takes away from the feel of the original record.
Because it takes away the personal
thing of it.
And I think, Robert, you saw that a lot at Williams Lake. It was that attention that folks, it resonated. The Williams Lake experience resonated, and we see so much talent. And this is a question for both you guys. It just seems to me we see so much talent coming from North Carolina. I mean, to include yourself with what you've done. What makes that? Is it the blend of the environment? Is it the roughness of the soil, or what makes that happen?
Well, I think part of it, just like the western part of North Carolina, you have all these 200 years ago, you had all these people playing music. A lot of it, some of it's homemade instruments. And some of the best musicians in the world probably came out of the western part of North Carolina. People like Doc Watson, recognized all over the world. Even though he was a bluegrass picker, jazz players, everybody knows Doc Watson. And a lot of the great jazz players can't play as well as Doc did. And they were just you had the mountains, the coast, Piedmont, you had different music, different sections of the state.
We're going to go to break. I want you to be thinking about a question, though. When we go to break, I want you to be thinking about this question. When we look at music in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and we see some of those songs, and today, are we reinventing sounds and parts of sounds that were heard and accentuated back then? Are we now reinventing some of those and bringing them back? Be thinking about that as we go to break. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking with two dynamic giants in the music business. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Whether it's video, voice, internet, or cellular, Star Communications connects you to the things you love. It's what we do and have done for over 50 years. Star Communications, your local technology company.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking with Eddie Ray, and we're talking with Robert Honeycutt today. If there's anybody that knows anything about music, worldwide, around the country, it would be Eddie Ray. He has been involved in music for 60 years. You were inducted into the Hall of Fame here in North Carolina in 2009. You've literally traveled all over the world. I could list names, executive positions you've held in record companies from Capitol Records. You name it, you've been there and you've done that. I want to kind of cut to your book, and you do have it's an excellent autobiography, and just I enjoyed the read on it. But particularly in chapter 14, your quote from your book, and you said this tongue-in-cheek, "I saved Pink Floyd." And you said, but I really did save the British rock group for Capitol Records, American record label. This year was 1964. When I left Imperial to join a new division of Capitol Records in Hollywood called Tower, how I landed the position, and you talk about it, but Pink Floyd, tell us a bit about that, because we're talking about music, and I want folks to understand the people that you rubbed shoulders with were internationally recognized folks. It's not, whereas I may see somebody and they may be from 2 or 3 states and or what have you. You were internationally recognized as a connector.
Well, what happened, there was an era in the, I guess it was the early 60s, wasn't it? What we refer to in the music industry as the British invasion.
Absolutely.
When all the Beatles and all the English acts. There was a company in England that owned 90% of all these artists. It's called EMI. And they had recently purchased the number 1 or number 2. It alternated between Columbia Records and Capitol. During that period was always number 1 and number 2, Capitol Records. EMI purchased Capitol Records. They gave Capitol first refusal rights on all of these English artists for the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
We're talking billions of dollars.
So what happened? Capitol was hot. They had a lot of artists. They had Barbra Streisand, Nat King Cole, the Beach Boys, and Buck Owens. They had hit after hit after Frank Sinatra, most of his stuff. And most of their A&R producers, artists and repertoire, who produced these, they were from the era of the 40s and the 50s. Mm-hmm. They were older. Music has changed. They never had any experience with independent producers who most had begun to produce most of the hit records.
Big culture shift, too.
Big culture shift. So what they did, they didn't understand this music. There's a lot, and they were turning this music down. And they were being picked up by other independent labels. And so when they brought me in, because I had been picked up some of these artists, and what I did, the first thing I did, I listened to a record that they had and didn't know what they had. They released it and it sold nothing. I listened to it and I decided to re-release it. And it was a group called Freddie and the Dreamers, and it became number 1 in the nation. Okay. Then I looked into the catalog, and I saw this group beginning to make noise in Europe, beginning to do named Pink Floyd. So I listened to it. Very, very different group, and Capitol was getting ready to turn it down. They had 2 weeks left on the option. I listened to it. I decided to pick it up for Capitol. I picked it up, and I brought them to America. I released the first two first 2 albums on them. We did fairly well. I'm trying to think of that one song that did it. But what happened, I brought them, I'll never forget it. When we had our first album release, we always had a pre-release party, where all of our distributors, DJs, radio people, we invited out. And you won't believe this, they had already begun selling in Europe some. I think only 75 people attended it. A couple of years later, they came out with, there wasn't a stadium in the world would hold them. But so when I say I saved them for them, it was several years before the 2 big albums came out, The Dark Side of the Moon and what's the other, The Wall.
Right.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. I saved them with Capitol because otherwise Capitol still had the contract on them, and they would have gone to another independent label. And incidentally, I was talking about pictures. I had pictures taken with them. I had them over here for 2 weeks, and they were in my office, and they were. It shows you how things change. They were so interested. They wanted to see the studio, and they wanted to see where Nat King Cole recorded and where the Beatles recorded. And a few years later, they outsold all of those groups.
The interesting thing, and Robert Honeycutt, I'm hearing Eddie say, is it almost gets back to a couple of reads in your book here, is that it gets back to that moment that you were able to recognize something and see a pathway of connectivity for a lot of these folks as they move forward. Robert, you had that kind of innate local thing here in eastern North Carolina with a little dance club as well, because some of these folks you brought in, I think you've admitted to me, and probably on air, you didn't know whether you were going to have an audience or what, but you vested it and moved it forward, and for this area, that was huge.
You never knew what to expect when you booked an artist or a band. Mm-hmm. And of course, if they'd had several hit records, like Jackie Wilson had a bunch of hit records, Martha Reeves had a bunch. You pretty much guaranteed a crowd. And if you didn't pay them more than you figured you'd take in, you'd be okay. Right. But you never knew. It was a gamble, big gamble.
What really, when you look back at your life now, and folks would just have to read the book. I can't get all this on air. But looking at and having read this book and thinking about all the places you have been, and literally, I'm talking iconic people by name, and you've named a few of them, everybody from Frank Sinatra, we just talked about Pink Floyd, and others that are different kinds of genres of music, but yet they're known worldwide. How does that feel? How does that feel now at where you are on your journey?
Well, it's a funny thing. I don't talk about myself, my history. It took a long time before I was convinced to do this book because a lot of people don't believe me. And when I go back and I think of some of the things, when I say against all odds, things happen. I'll give you an example of, in 1957, I was with an independent record company called Imperial Records. And we had a country artist named Slim Whitman. We had a couple of big hits, didn't we? Yeah, Indian Love Call and Rosemary. And at one time in England, in the top pop charts, I had 3 out of the top 5 records by Slim Whitman. That was before country started selling in England, because Slim wasn't really that much country. But the story I want to tell you that I think about, and I don't understand why I did it. I was doing national sales and promotion for a couple of years and didn't have a staff. I would go across country myself. I would go into Provo, Utah, Oregon City, Oregon, in 1957, into country stations with Slim Whitman. Here's this little that guy from L.A. coming in with a country record. But that's not only did I get him played all over the country. First, they were surprised to see me promoting the country artists. They didn't know I grew up in the mountains listening to WSB and WBT in Charlotte. But anyway, the story was, during my visit with the DJ, I said, I have a new record with a new artist out of New Orleans. He's going to be a giant. And I said, he sounds like Louis Armstrong. I said, he's going to be another Louis Armstrong. He sounded nothing like Louis Armstrong. He said, Eddie, put it on, let's listen to it. And he says, why don't we play this and let the people hear this, make the decision, tell me whether they like it or not. 2 years later, I did this at every country station in the country. I didn't come south. And it was Fats Domino. He was on every jukebox. There wasn't a truck stop in the country that he wasn't on. And he was one of the early ones, he and Chuck Berry, that was on every country jukebox in the country. And that's the type of thing I said, I wonder why I did it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think sometimes, when I look, and again, I encourage people to take a look at this book. It's an interesting read, not only because it's about your history, but it shows that folks can have these accomplishments, but somehow they have to understand they've got to break out of whatever that colloquial shell is, of which you're an example of somebody that did that, and go where maybe they didn't expect themselves to go. And I want to talk about that a bit more as we come back for our last segment. And again, I want folks to understand as we're going to break that we're talking with Eddie Ray, who is a icon in music in many ways, nationally, internationally. And of course, Robert Honeycutt was kind enough to bring him in today and also has a background in music. And we're going to come back, and after this break is our last segment, so I want to really get into some more details. Stay with us and we'll be back in one moment.
What? How can that be? The way someone broke in and stole my TV. Unless I want to install steel bars, I'll call the experts in security. Star Communications is the one that I can trust to get the job done.
Yeah, the only thing worse than that is not feeling safe in your own home or business.
Call Star Communications now. We're your local security experts, from alarms and monitoring to automation and personal protection.
Word.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us today. This has been a rapidly moving show today. I got to mention Robert Stroud with the Boogie Shoes Radio Network, the DJ that probably if we had him here, we'd have to stretch this show for 3 or 4 hours to just get all the conversation going. Robert, we do want to mention you and thank you for mentioning We Should Know each week on your show, all those folks at WCL and the morning show with Grandpa and Nola Z and the L-Man and Nicole and Tommy the Fly and Wayne Weeks and all the others that mention our show. We're talking today with two folks that just such a huge history. Locally, Robert Honeycutt, and of course, Eddie Ray with your background worldwide, with all of these huge record music making people, should I say. I want to mention a couple of things, and Robert, I want to make sure we get in the Hall of Fame and the inductees this year, but I want to mention two things that has an interesting kind of alliance, and yes and no. Somehow in there came the genetic lineage of Eddie Ray, your grandfather. Yeah. And being very hardworking, dedicated people. Again, in the western part of North Carolina, your grandfather was a slave.
Yeah. Yes. It's hard to believe that someone is still living whose grandfather was a slave,
And the importance of that, and I want to use this as a catapult, the importance of that, and I'm sure you've thought about it. I know Robert Honeycutt has, and if they hadn't, a lot of people think about it. Look where you went and all these things you've done, to include being one of Ronald Reagan's key people, because you were appointed by President Ronald Reagan at U.S. Commission in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Tell us about that. And you were part of a group of folks, African Americans in California, that supported Ronald Reagan,
Yes.
and probably to some degree were instrumental in helping him gain the presidency.
Well, we certainly tried,
It sounded like it from the book. It did.
Yeah, we supported him 100%, and we had opened up campaign office right in the heart of the black neighborhood. Yeah, some people, of course, some people, when we first did this, they was against it, but I said, come in, let's talk about it. Do you know what he did as the governor of California? You know who he appointed in key positions as governor of California? We took full-page ads in the black newspaper showing his appointments of black people in critical positions in California politics. And so that some things they didn't know about him, see. Yeah.
Well, and to that point, to his appointee point, talk about what he appointed you to do once he became president.
I became a U.S. Commissioner of Copyright, and I served for 4 years as chairman of the Copyright Royalty Tribunal for 4 years.
And there's, in your book, again, there's some interesting pictures where there's some folks that are appearing before you with copyright requests and dealing with copyright issues, which is
from the commissioner of basketball, commissioner of baseball, all those people appeared before us. You didn't know that, huh?
Yeah. We're surprising him, right? We're surprising him. So the point being, I think that the message I'm hearing is that for those folks that are listening, at this point in time, Eddie, wherever they are at in their life, no matter how turbulent it is that within them is the capacity and capability to accomplish great things, and you're proof of that.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm also happy that a friend of mine encouraged me. He says, Eddie, weren't you originally from North Carolina? I said, yes. He said, how come with all the great artists from the state of North Carolina, isn't there a North Carolina Music Hall of Fame? I said, I don't know. So we did some investigation, found that one had been started, and he asked me to come down. I was living in Alexandria because I just resigned from the Copyright Royalty Tribunal, and get it started, and it's really doing well. So we started the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame, which Robert will tell you about.
Okay. And Robert, I want to segue that to you, so we'll make sure we get it in. You're on the board of the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame. You obviously were inducted in October '09.
Right.
Inductees this year, again, talent from North Carolina. Who are the
First of all, Eddie is the operational director. And Eddie came out of retirement to take over the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame. And he came to 4 walls and no staff, and he built it to what it is today. But anyway, this year we are inducting in October Kelly Pickler, Country Star, American Idol, the Avett Brothers. They're from Concord. They opened for the Rolling Stones in Raleigh last July. Super big group, especially to the young people. David Holt. David's big in the bluegrass, won 4 Grammys. He did all the documentaries on Doc Watson before he passed away. Rihanna Giddens and the Carolina Chocolate Drops. She's a superstar in her own right. The Band of Oz, our beach band, they've been inducted. Ron Tyson, he's, I believe, from Monroe. He's been with the Otis Williams' Temptations for like 30 plus years. And a couple of deceased people. But anyway, we're going to be having a big event this year. In fact, we've grown from, I guess, a couple of hundred people. The first year I went in 2011. This year we're moving into an auditorium that seats 1,700.
Wow.
And it will be a sellout.
Wow.
And Kelly Pickler's agreed to perform, the Avett Brothers, the Band of Oz, David Holt, And who knows? Last year, you know, Eric Church showed up, and Warren Haynes played for us, and Bo Schrontz and the Fantastic Shakers. They all performed.
These genres of music we were talking about that Robert just alluded to, you got folks like Scotty McCreery that most folks will recognize that name, country. Do you see more and more crossover, what they call crossover from country to R&B and that kind of thing? Are you guys seeing more of that happening, or do you see more of a separation of country and rhythm and blues kinds of stuff?
Well, I think what we attempt to do, and I think we've been very successful in doing, is that we honor and commemorate each of these genres of music. We try to have at least one person from each genre of music, because they deserve it, because they were superstars in their own genre of music. And the one thing I want to say, from my experience, I just cannot believe there's any other state, if there is, it's very limited, that has as many international stars as the state of North Carolina, and as many genres of music as North Carolina has. It's unbelievable. In jazz, we have some of the greatest artists in the world. In bluegrass, some of the greatest artists in the world. In country, in every genre of music, North Carolina. And what I find that unusual, some states promote music more. North Carolina, from what I see, has never really promoted this music like Tennessee has. Right. You know, like Tennessee does in Nashville. Absolutely. And then down in Mississippi, down in Memphis, how they promote that Mississippi Delta blues thing.
It's a major tourism site.
Yeah, and in spite of that, in fact, I was a guest a couple of years ago at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, and I was telling the president, I said, our little museum will fit into one of your closets, but we will compete with you every day of the year, and we'll win on the quality in the different genres of music, where they only have one or two genres. We have it all here in North Carolina.
And I think, Robert, to your point, it's almost like it does come from the rich environment here.
It must be.
Yeah, sometimes and I've read articles about folks sing, especially with country music, about their own personal experience. Yeah. So people express that through song and through music.
Well, you take jazz, mainly came out of New Orleans.
Right.
Well, you got the mountain, you got the mountain music, you got the Piedmont music, the blues, the music out of Durham. It originated right here in North Carolina.
And you got that whole segment that is referred to as beach music. I mean, you can actually go to your phone and pull it up, and you see some of the artists that you've had at Williams Lake.
Well, you take David Brothers. That's a combination of rock, country, bluegrass. Right. Rihanna Giddens, one of the greatest talents out anywhere. She's got a combination of jazz, blues, bluegrass, all of it, all combined into one her own music.
But I want to thank you. I want to thank you very much for help promoting us in the Hall of Fame I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's always
and
my
thank
pleasure.
You for the review.
You have brought a lot of peace to a lot of people, because music does that. You have been instrumental in a lot of movement, because music moves people.
Exactly.
And we admire you for that. And as a North Carolinian, and I think I can speak for a lot of folks, and Robert can too, we appreciate your contribution and dedication for what you have done for this state.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for being with us today, Robert. Thank you for bringing this fine gentleman to the studio and giving me the opportunity to meet you.
Oh, he's a dear friend of mine.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for being with us today. We've had an excellent conversation with some folks that you need to pick up this book, great book. We'll see you next week again on the radio, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.